Ladies and gentlemen, shalom from Israel. Leah, thank you for excellent framing. Indeed, you're right. This session today, talking about the war, is not about updates of the war, but it's more about now that we have been doing together this journey in the previous 4 chapters, talking about different aspects of the Middle East. Today, I think and believe, and I hope, that the presentation I'll do about the war, contextualizing that war in a wider perspective, will resonate well because we already have the infrastructure that we laid in the previous 4 sessions. So today, Israel-Hamas war. Leah, you said Hezbollah. Actually, you're right. It's simultaneously Israel-Hamas war. At the same time, Israel-Hezbollah's skirmish. We'll talk about it, of course, during our presentation. Just again, as always, reminder of the recent session that we had. The last session, we talked about Iran's and Turkey's hegemonic vision, and we focused particularly at the Iranian regime hegemonic vision. And we talked about this axis of armies of terror, known as the axis of resistance, that Iran has been building, nurturing, supporting, arming in the region for the last couple of decades, and how that axis of terror, called the axis of resistance, actually so significantly impact the geostrategic landscape of the Middle East. So in today's sessions, this is the agenda. We're starting with some short introduction talking about Gaza Strip. Some milestones in the contemporary history of Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip, between 1948 and 1967, was ruled by Egypt. It was not annexed to Egypt. It was ruled by an Egyptian military governance. Following the 1967 war, also known as the 6 Days War, Israel occupied Gaza Strip, and Israel controlled and ruled Gaza Strip until 2005. Like Egypt, Israel did not annex Gaza Strip. During that period of time, Israeli governments established communities of Israeli settlers or citizens who lived in Gaza Strip. Some people called it settlers and settlements. Some people called it communities. It depends what your political outlook is. I'm using the term communities just for practical reasons. So we had some 21 Israeli communities in Gaza Strip, with a population of some 10,000 Israeli settlers who lived in Gaza Strip, and in addition to that, presence of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, all that period of time. In 2005, Israeli government made a decision. It was passed in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, as a law. It's called the disengagement. And based upon that law, Israel pulled out from Gaza Strip, totally evacuating all the Israeli communities that used to be in Gaza Strip, obviously evacuating all the Israelis who lived in Gaza Strip, and the Israeli soldiers that were securing the Israeli communities in Gaza Strip. And Israel handed control over Gaza Strip to the hands of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, reminding you, was established in 1993, following the Israeli PLO agreement, rather known as the Oslo Agreement. The rule of the Palestinian Authority over Gaza Strip didn't last long, because a year and a half later, in the summer of 2007, Hamas, an Islamic Palestinian organization that was born in Gaza Strip in the 1980s, Hamas conducted a violent coup in Gaza Strip, terminating violently the rule of the Palestinian Authority, its own brothers. And since 2007, Hamas has been ruling Gaza Strip up until today. How did we get here to this whole issue of this war that we are kind of like almost marking now 10 months to this war? It is the conjunction of 2 major processes in the region that we already actually talked about. And one is the story of the inner Palestinian power struggle over leadership, and the other issue is the Iranian hegemonic vision. Just as a reminder, when we are talking about the inner Palestinian struggle over leadership, it goes back to something that we talked about, I think it was in the 2nd session, when we talked about the whole power struggle in the Arab world following the downfall of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. We talked about how the the Arab world was kind of like engaged in this huge political and intellectual and cultural discussion and debate regarding the whole thing of national statehood. And you may recall that we talked about those three major camps that were engaged in this power struggle. The Islamist camp that rejects nationalism, that wants to have a caliphate. We talked about the pan-Arabism, the Qawm that wants to see this one big Arab entity. And we talked about the camp that supported the concept of independent national statehood in the Arab world. We also remember that when we talked about that issue, we mentioned specifically, when we talked about the Islamic camp, we talked about the Muslim Brotherhood as a representative of this whole Islamic camp who totally rejects the concept of national statehood. You may remember, once again, you see the major features of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and agenda was established in 1928. 60 years later, in Gaza Strip, Hamas was born, and Hamas formally defines itself as the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. Hence, you can understand that actually Hamas ideologically is coming from the hub of the Islamic camp, who totally rejects the concept of independent national statehood. There is some irony in that, because today, in the context of the war, as you probably know, in the West, there are circles who are chanting the slogan of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." They think that by chanting them, they are chanting Hamas objectives. This is not Hamas objective. Ideologically, Hamas rejects the concept of an independent Palestinian state because it doesn't support the concept of national statehood. Rather, alternatively, Hamas wants to see a global caliphate, an Islamic global caliphate. So there is some sort of irony in that regard. The Fatah, the major rivalry of Hamas, the Fatah was established way before Hamas. And by the way, Hamas is a word in Arabic which means religious enthusiasm, and it's also an initials. In Arabic, it's the initials of Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement. Something sounds familiar, right? The resistance, it's exactly the same resistance that we talked about earlier when we talked about in the previous session, the axis of resistance. It's the same concept, reminding you the concept of resistance that vows to eliminate Israel, that vows to end the Western presence in the Middle East, that totally objects and rejects every single value that the West stands for. It's exactly the same resistance in the initials of Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. Fatah was the major rivalry of Hamas and the major spine of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who signed an agreement with Israel in 1993, the Oslo Agreement. Fatah is coming from the national statehood camp. Fatah does not support the concept of caliphate. Fatah, differently from Hamas, does not think that people should live their life according to legislation that is based upon the Islamic religious codex, the Sharia law. Fatah basically says, no, it should be based upon parliamentary-based legislation. And the reason for that is because many of the Palestinians, in our case, or some of the Palestinians, are not Muslims, they are Christians. So you can't impose Islamic religious law on those people. And so right there, you see there is this major difference between Hamas and Fatah. And the other thing is in the context of the way they vis-a-vis or viewed the trajectory of the conflict with Israel. Hamas vows to eliminate Israel. Stop, full stop, ideologically and operatively. Fatah, by signing the agreement with Israel in 1993, Fatah, which is the major spine of the PLO, de facto recognizes Israel's right to exist. When there were elections for the Palestinian Authority in 2006, Hamas won the elections. The international powers, the Western powers, EU, the United States, and others that guarantee the Israeli PLO agreement from 1993, turned to Hamas and said, look, we will recognize you as a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, but in order to do that, you, Hamas, you have to comply with three conditions. You have to recognize Israel's right to exist. You have to respect all the agreements that were signed between Israel and the PLO in 1993, the Oslo Accord, and you have to abandon terror. Hamas turned down all those conditions, and therefore, the United States administrations, the EU, who guaranteed the Israeli PLO agreement, basically said to Hamas, as long as you are declining those conditions, you are designated as a terror organization, as it is designated up until today. So this is one aspect, the inter-Palestinian power struggle between Hamas and Fatah. Once again, we saw the Islamic camp, we saw the national independent camp, and that power struggle reflected within the Palestinians as it has been reflected in many other parts of the Arab. Now here comes the second component, and this is the story of the Iranian hegemonic vision. We talked about it in the last session. We talked about the resistance, how the mullah regime in Tehran sophisticatedly was able to market itself to the Arab world as the one who is leading this camp of resistance that will liberate Palestine, because it is very appealing to the mindset of many people in the Arab world, intellectually and politically and emotionally. But actually, it has been a Trojan horse created by the mullah regime. Remember when we talked about the Sunni Shiite power struggle, 1400 years of animosity between these two camps in Islam, and the Shiite regime in Iran now finding a great opportunity to take over the Arab world, which is predominantly Sunni, from within in a very sophisticated checkmate move by using the story of resistance, selling it, marketing it to the Arab world, saying to the Arab world, oh, we build all these militias, Hezbollah and the Iraqi Shiite militias and the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We support and arm and finance all those militias because they will be the one that will liberate Palestine. Meanwhile, those militias actually took over Arab states from within in the service of Iran. And then you may recall we talked also about the issue of the Ring of Fire as part of the Iranian master plan to eliminate Israel and to position Iran as the regional superpower, and by doing that once and for all decisively winning this historical power struggle between Persians and Arabs, Shiites and Sunnis. This is the way the mullah regime views all these things. You may remember that we talked about the significance of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the context of the Ring of Fire, and their task, according to this Iranian master plan, that task is to exhaust Israel through repeating military rounds, as it happens to be exactly the case for the last 30 years, particularly intensified after Hamas took over Gaza Strip in 2007. And remember that we talked about this concept of the Ring of Fire, how in the end of the day, it was supposed to result in this day of unifying of arenas, Wahdat al-Sahat, when all the Iranian-backed militias of the Ring of Fire, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shiite militias, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, with the secondary backing of the Houthis in Yemen, and others militias, Afghans and Pakistani Shiite militias present in Syria, they were all supposed to join hands together to attack Israel from all directions simultaneously and to bring Israel to an end. Now that we understand this whole structure and the concept of unifying of the arenas, we can now start asking ourselves, so why did Hamas launch this October 7th attack? One reason was that Hamas was under the impression that the day of unifying of arenas has come. Hamas' impression was not baseless, because in the months before the war, there has been series of meetings of the leaders of the axis of resistance in Beirut, in Damascus, in Baghdad, in Iran in August 2023, including meeting with the supreme leader of Iran. And what Hamas and Islamic Jihad heard in those meetings were basically their colleagues to the axis of resistance told them, we are willing, ready, and able. And so it seems like as if Hamas came to the conclusion that October 7th was supposed to be that day. The other reason is to block the whole process of normalization between Israel and Arab states, a process that has been intensified in the last couple of years, reminding you in 2020, the issue of the Abraham Accords, the signing of peace treaty between Israel and UAE, peace treaty between Israel and Bahrain, normalization agreement between Israel and Morocco, normalization agreement between Israel and Sudan, and they are joining to already existing peace agreement between Israel and Egypt that was signed in 1979 and Israel and Jordan in 1994. The process of Israeli-Arab rapprochement, if you wish, normalization, actually disturbs enormously Iran and Hamas and Islamic Jihad, because they are looking for a totally different trajectory of eliminating Israel. And so therefore there was an incentive, a reason for Hamas to launch this war, hoping that by doing that it will totally cut and block the process of normalization and actually reverse the whole process of Israeli-Arab rapprochement. So are we heading towards a multi-front war? This has been the question since day one of this war, because we talked about unifying of arenas, we talked about the Iranian master plan, we got the players set on the chessboard, you got Hezbollah in Lebanon, you got the Houthis in Yemen, you got the Iraqi Shiite militias in Iraq, some of them present also in Syria. So are we heading to a multi-front war? And since day one, we noticed an interesting tactic of the Iranian regime. Once again, to emphasize, it is all orchestrated by the Iranian regime. It's not random. It is all like this one big chess player that is moving the players on the chessboard according to some strategy. And so the Mullah regime in Tehran, enormously disturbed with the scenario of the possible downfall of Hamas ruling Gaza Strip. Remember, Hamas ruling Gaza Strip is an enormous significant component in the Iranian regime master plan, because Hamas' role and Islamic Jihad role was and is to perpetuate and escalate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Why is it the Iranian interest? Because the more the conflict escalates, the Iranian regime can continue and sell and market itself to the Arab world as the one who will defend Palestinians and liberate Palestine, regardless of the fact that the Mullah regime couldn't care less about the Palestinians. In the war in Syria, the Mullah regime and its proxies are responsible for the butchering of thousands of Palestinians in Syria. So the Mullah regime, disturbed with the potential downfall of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip as a significant military power, the Mullah regime applied the following strategy. Operating different proxies across the board, Hezbollah in the north, Iraqi Shiite militias in Iraq and in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, to attack simultaneously or gradually or not simultaneously, both Israel and United States and international interests in the Middle East. And the purpose of this whole combined orchestrated military pressure is, in the end of the day, to put pressure on the international community and the United States particularly, to put pressure on Israel to stop the war in Gaza, and by that to save Hamas rule in Gaza. And so what we have witnessed since October 7, or to be more accurate, October 8th, we started to see how that master plan has been moving all along the region. Iraqi Shiite militias are attacking the United States presence in Syria, Iraq, and in some cases in Jordan. The Houthis in Yemen are attacking maritime in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. You see right here, you see on the left-hand side, you see the Red Sea connecting the Indian Ocean and the eastern basin of the Mediterranean. And in the circle, you see Bab el-Mandab Strait between actually Asia and Africa, if you wish. This is one of the most significant strategic locations on the planet. Some 15% of world trade is going through this passage. We can understand that this is enormous pressure card that the Mullah regime has been applying since October 8th and continuing attacking maritime in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Again, the purpose is to put pressure on the world, international community, the United States particularly, to put pressure on Israel to stop the war in Gaza and to save Hamas rule. In the north part of Israel, along the Israeli-Lebanese border, we have seen since October 8th a very clear pattern of skirmish between Israel and the most significant proxy of Iran, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, that was established, you may remember, we talked about it in the previous session, in the early 1980s by the Iranians. There has been some sort of like unwritten field line game, sort of speaking, or game lines between Israel and Hezbollah since October 8th. Most of the skirmish, the exchange of military punches between Israel and Hezbollah, is roughly speaking in parallel to the Israeli-Lebanese border, meaning the northern part of Israel on the one hand, the southern part of Lebanon on the other hand. And what we have been witnessing up until now is that both sides, basically to a large extent, are confined into these non-written lines of exchange of power, punches. Hezbollah is mostly attacking the Israeli northern communities spread along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Israel is mostly attacking Hezbollah's military infrastructure in South Lebanon. Here and there, the two sides are basically a little bit extending the distance and the significance of the punching of the military exchange of punches, but yet it is all up until now confined with these unwritten, unspoken field lines, basically reflecting both sides' interest up until now not to be dragged into a whole-out war. It's neither Hezbollah's and Iran's interest nor Israel. However, this almost 10 months of continuing skirmish is resulting in a dynamic that could result in a slippery slope towards massive eruption. Some 100,000 Israelis have been evacuated from the northern part of Israel. The same number is about accurate and valid as we are talking about Lebanese from South Lebanon that also had to flee. The Lebanese people are screaming at the face of the Hezbollah, do not drag us to this war. This is not our war. The problem is that the real boss in Lebanon is not the Lebanese government or the parliament or the political parties. It's all a facade. It's all an empty shell, because the real boss in Lebanon is Hezbollah with its Iranian weapon. Lebanon is an Iranian satellite. The Hezbollah is applying the Iranians' interests and orders. And in that regard, the Hezbollah basically says to the Lebanese, you can scream as much as you want. We don't care. We don't care about our own brothers and sisters in the south part of Lebanon. We don't care if Lebanon is going to be dragged into a war. We have a different agenda and a different priorities. At the same time, we also witnessed an escalation in the West Bank. There is a constant military Israeli operations in the West Bank, basically aims to keep the lead on the path as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, backed by the Iranians, including smuggling of weapons from Jordan, smuggled by Iranians affiliated terror cell, are trying to ignite the West Bank to expand the military fronts. So it wouldn't be only Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shiite militias. It will also percolate into the territory of the West Bank. And so there has been an ongoing Israeli constant effort to put the lead, to keep the lead, on the bubbling part in the West Bank of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and local Palestinian militias in the West Bank that are also interested in joining in the fight. The bottom line in that context is that when we're looking at the question, are we heading towards a multi-front war? The answer, as of now, as it has been since day one, it has the potential to get there. It could happen. As of now, it did not happen, but it could happen, and it could happen in a slippery slope. We have to be aware of that. Another aspect that I would like shortly to explore with you is the Arab world and this war. In the Arab world, vis-a-vis the war, there are two different voices that we have to differentiate between. One voice is totally expressing solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza, condemning Israel, portraying Israel as a genocidal entity, as a racist entity, and so on and so on. This is one clear major voice in the Arab world. But notice that I said this voice is identifying with the Palestinians in Gaza. It does not express identification with Hamas, which is very interesting, but not surprising. There is a lot of criticism in the Arab world on Hamas. That criticism didn't start on October 8. It was there already way before October 7. And that criticism on Hamas centers around, roughly speaking, 2 or 3 major focal points. One, you, Hamas, the Arab world says to Hamas, including, by the way, the Palestinian Authority, they are saying to Hamas, you took over Gaza Strip violently, crushing the rule of your own brothers, the Palestinian Authority. By doing that, you caused a split within the Palestinians and you harmed the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people. Now, you, Hamas, took control over Gaza Strip since 2007, but you dragged Gaza Strip into a dead-end street. As a fact, you basically regenerate military rounds with Israel because of your radical agenda, and those military rounds didn't provide the Palestinians with anything other than death, misery, and destruction. And the third, and perhaps the most, I would say, emotionally powerful Arab criticism on Hamas is the one that says to Hamas, you have your own radical agenda coming from the hub of the Muslim Brotherhood, which already many people in the Arab world are very resentful of. Never mind that, but you, Hamas, dragged Gaza Strip to havoc, death, and destruction because of your radical agenda. Never mind that. All right. But you dragged Gaza Strip to death and destruction at the service of the Iranian regime, the Shiite Iranian mullah regime, the same regime who occupies Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and butchered your own brothers, the Sunnis, because remember, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are Sunnis, they are not Shiites. Not only that, they are butchering your own Palestinian brothers in Syria. And you, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, are sacrificing your own brothers and sisters in Gaza Strip at the altar of the same mullah regime in Iran. This is a focal point of criticism in the Arab world on Hamas. Here you see in front of you some of these cartoons published in Arab media that express this notion. For the example, you see to the right-hand side in the top, you see this puppeteer. This is the Iranian regime. He holds two puppets. One says, it's in Arabic, of course. One says Hamas. The other one says Islamic Jihad. You see beneath there is an urban area, and the script in Arabic reads Kita' Gaza, which means Gaza Strip. The message here is very clear. The Arab world says to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, you are puppets in the hand of the puppeteers, the Iranians, and you are sacrificing your own brothers and sisters in Gaza. If you look to the left-hand side in the bottom, you see an interesting cartoon published in Arab media, major Arab media. You see it has two parts, number one and number two. In number one to the left, you see this figure standing up representing the mullah regime in Tehran. It is giving a signal with as a pistol. And you see beneath that there are two figures bending. One is colored white, the other one is colored black. The white represents Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The black figure standing or sitting or bending next to that is Hezbollah. And you see an arrow pointing to Israel. That cartoon, number one, basically says the Iranian regime, as part of its plan of Ring of Fire, has given the sign for unifying of the arenas. The time has come to storm and attack Israel from all directions. It gives the sign. Now we move to number two, to the right-hand side, and you see that the white figure disappeared. It runs to the war against Israel. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are running to fight Israel October 7th. But the black figure that remains in its place, bending in its place, and this is Hezbollah. And if you look closer, you may be able to see that it is chained to the mullah regime, the figure that stands with the pistol. The message here from the Arab world to Hamas is, you, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but particularly Hamas, you were under the impression that the day of unifying of arenas has come on October 7. You rushed to attack Israel, thinking that your bodies will join you, but you have been betrayed. They stand behind. They didn't join you. And so you dragged Gaza Strip to total disaster and havoc because you were an idiot, because you believe the Iranian regime and your bodies in the axis of resistance. You, Hamas, you are responsible for the biggest catastrophe ever that happens to the Palestinian people since 1948. This is a strong message that comes across the Arab world, including the Palestinians themselves. The day after, to conclude my presentation, and I want to make two major observations, starting with the axis of resistance. I want to be clear in what I'm going to say now. As far as Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah are concerned, they are on the right path. They are moving ahead in their plan to eliminate Israel. It goes back to two major features of that axis, and particularly when we talk about Hamas and Hezbollah. One is the fact that they vote to eliminate Israel. I emphasize that because it is something that is totally alien to Western mindset. What does it mean you vote to eliminate somebody? You don't vote to eliminate no one. But it's there, and it's important to internalize that. And the other significant feature that we have to internalize is the fact that both Hamas and Hezbollah are willingly, knowingly, and intentionally sacrificing their brothers and sisters. which is, again, something that is totally alien to Western mindset. And it has to be internalized and understood when we look at this situation and the challenge it presents. Another aspect of the day after, of course, has to do with the whole story of what can be done in order to offer both Israelis and Palestinians a better future regarding what I just said, or taking into consideration this bleak picture that I just portrayed, talking about Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, look, Hamas is not going to disappear. Islamic Jihad in Palestine is not going to disappear. They are going to continue to exist. The issue is not to eliminate them because it's totally irrelevant. The issue here is, in the end of the day, to limit as much as possible their ability to continue and to dictate their radical agenda and the Iranian radical agenda, as they have been unfortunately quite successfully doing for the last 40 years. That's the objective. Achieving that requires two major tracks. One is to crush their military spine. It doesn't mean that you will eliminate the last militant of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or the last rockets or the last whatever. It's not going to happen. It's to eliminate the military spine in the sense that they will not be any longer able to use this military platform to continue and to dictate the radical agenda. And the other thing is to create what I call the regional envelope of major Arab states who are not less than Israel threatened and intimidated by the radical agenda that Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Iran and Hezbollah are leading. Egypt and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, that is facing a growing significant threat by both Hamas and Iran. They have a very clear interest in the end of the day to achieve the same thing, meaning restricting Hamas and Islamic Jihad to the maximum possible. They know that they're not going to disappear, and they will be, Hamas and Islamic Jihad will be part of the Palestinian system. The question is whether they will be able to continue and to play the destructive role they have been unfortunately able to do for the last 40 years. That, of course, calls also for a very decisive, constructed Western policy that keeps eye on the target all the time, reminding you that the Western policy, as it has been defined by both President Biden and the EU and major Western players, was Hamas rule in Gaza Strip must come to an end. That is correct. This is the right objective. And that's the reason why you need to keep eye on the target. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'm concluding my presentation. Once again, as a reminder, as you all know, we are going to be in the United States from September 24 until July 25. So hopefully we could be available for events and educational programs for your chapters. Once again, you're very welcome to contact Leah and to find out more details. And obviously, as always, we are more than honored and happy to be able to offer you our educational content. Thank you for your patience, and now I'm opening this session to your questions. And I do apologize for the...
Thank you, Avi. Many of you already reached out asking about Avi's store. So as I mentioned, we are working on securing some funding. Our goal is to send something out your way by next week. So please look for information in your inbox. I will be sure to include all of you in a direct email in addition to whatever we send out through the brief. So if you missed one of the briefs, you'll still get it directly to your emails. With that, questions, you know the drill. Unmute yourself, raise your hand, and go for it. Amanda.
How does the PA and the Palestinian Authority fit into your kind of like vision and strategy of limiting Hamas's military ability and creating alignments and kind of stability with the other Arab states.
Yes, well,
Avi, could I suggest something before you answer? I'm looking at the time. We have 10 minutes or 11 minutes. Do we have any other questions? And by this, we'll know how you could be elaborative or not. So any other questions? Okay, so don't go too long, because if someone may have a question, I still want to give them an opportunity to ask. So, okay,
I'll
sorry.
try to do it concise as
I just want to
possible.
manage the time and make sure that everybody has a chance to ask.
Of course. Look,
Thank you.
in the vision of major players, including the US administration and some major Arab states, the PA is supposed to be the Palestinian responsible adult that will take control over Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority, at this point, is not able to do that. It will take some process to do that. The Palestinian Authority will not take control over Gaza Strip as long as it's going to be perceived as if it is taking control backed by Israeli spears. So it has to be done in a context of a regional envelope with the Arab world that actually will incorporate Palestinian Authority and provide the scaffolding for the Palestinian Authority to move into Gaza Strip and take control effectively in Gaza Strip. That's the guiding mindset, I would say, in large circles, at least in the major Arab states and the American administration. We are looking at a process that is a long-term with a lot of questions marks, but this is roughly speaking the general outlook.
Thank you. Amanda, go inside. It seems like you're very cold.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, Avi, is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I would like to say again, this briefing was not about update on the war. It was about putting the war in the widest context based upon all the things that we previously talked about in our previous session. So I do hope, and I admit it's a challenge, but I do hope that it was easy for you, or basically more user-friendly, to put it this way, to look at the situation and to see how it inner dialogue with the previous things that we talked about. What I would like to emphasize in that regard is the following thing. Look, as a fact, in the Western discussion, both in policymaking as well as intellectual and cultural and academic discussion, in the West, in the last 40 years, since 1993, the overwhelming mantra was the story of two-state solution. But what happened on the ground at the same time was a very rapid and severe escalation of the conflict. So there has been a total contrast between these two things, which inevitably leads to the inevitable conclusion that the Western reading of the situation was totally not dialoguing with what was going on the ground. One of the major reasons to that, and this is a fact, one of the major reasons to that fact is, in my view, that the discussion in the West was too much overwhelmingly ruled, influenced by the narratives that both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, present. The Palestinians talked about occupation and discrimination. Some took it to a place of apartheid, even genocide, regardless of the fact whether it's accurate or inaccurate. I'm now saying what have been major Palestinians' narratives. Israelis' major narratives are also the issue of settlements. Israeli major narratives were like, well, the Palestinians constantly chosen violence. They constantly applied terror. They rejected all the offers, the generous offer they have been offered. Israel was extending its hand to peace, and so on and so on. These are the narratives of both sides that were very well reflected in the Western discussion. And the Western discussion was so pre-engaged with talking about the narratives that basically lacked the understanding that the whole story is being motivated by bigger factors, by bigger currents, power struggle over identity, path, and direction in the Arab world, Islamic versus national statehood, the Iranian hegemonic vision, the Shiite Sunni power struggle, all those things, the real powerhouse that in the end of the day shape the story of the conflict. All those things were totally not on the radar in the Western discussion.
Thank you, Avi. We have a question. Heidi? Unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And this may be too big of a question, but I guess I'm just wondering what the role of Israel, like the settlements in the West Bank and Netanyahu's decisions since October 7th, what role that is playing in either escalating or changing the trajectory of the situation.
Look, I'm not going to refer to Netanyahu nor to the Palestinian leadership because I don't want to go to that niche. I want to refer specifically talking about the settlements, and I want to be very clear about it. The settlements issue is yet one of many controversial subjects in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is a very controversial issue. It is a very sensitive issue. It has many ins and outs. Here is my take on that. If somebody will say to me, the settlements are the reason we don't have peace, I will show facts that basically counter that argument. And I will say, no, this is not the reason we don't have peace. If somebody will say to me, settlements are a major obstacle on the way to peace, I will say, yes, they are a major obstacle on the way of peace, as many other questions that are involved. And so I want to reemphasize again, and what is the most significant thing that for me, I think I would like to convey. Put aside for a moment the whole narratives, the Israelis narratives, the Palestinian narratives. I'm not negating them. I don't think that they are not important. Just put them aside. Why? Because in the end of the day, if we really want to understand what makes this conflict ticks, what really shapes its trajectory, and most significantly, if we want to be able to effectively help Israelis and Palestinians a way out, we need to understand not the narratives. We need to understand the real factors involved in shaping the trajectory of the conflict. This is my major message, because I'm not in the issue, I'm not in the job of, supporting that narrative or that narrative. That's not my job. My job is to try to bring the picture that is not there, because that's the missing picture that is crucial, not only for understanding what shapes the trajectory, but not less for being able maybe more effectively help both Israelis and Palestinians some sort of a way out. That's the way I view my job. I'm not an Israeli spokesperson. I'm not a Palestinian spokesperson. None of them is paying my salary. This is my educational mission.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Avi. Thank you all. As usual, we'll share on Monday the recording and the invite for next meeting. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Avi and to say to all of you goodbye, because next week I have a family event that I am participating. As you know, this session is taking place at 7 p.m. Israel time. So also there is life in between Zoom calls and work. So I won't be here next week. My colleague Sarah Sless will be here, and she will be helping Avi in anything related. So It was wonderful spending these 5 sessions with you, seeing how dedicated and how serious you are with this learning, with this difficult, complicated, challenging learning. So thank you all for being such wonderful partners. Thank you, Avi, as always, for being the best teacher.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank
hopefully we could come up with a session that is talking only about wonderful, amazing things and not about wars and conflict. Take care all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Shalom from Israel. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you.